Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to this month's meeting of the Nashville Microsoft Azure User Group. As you can see, that's the address of our website, and the session is being recorded for posting on our YouTube channel, which is also listed on the screen. This is our mission. Again, those of you who've been with the group for a while know all about the mission. We're all about everything related to Microsoft Azure, supporting our members, helping them learn, members at all levels, and we have folks in the group at all the different levels of management and technical folks. So we are here to also provide a forum for open discussion and informal networking among the membership. That's a little hard these days since we're not meeting in person anymore. Our group logistics, when times were good, we normally met every third Thursday of the month at 6 o'clock at Microsoft. And a very valuable session at 6 o'clock was food and networking. We've been able to eat food and actually do a lot of one-on-one networking, which it's hard to do these days. And then at 6:30, we normally started the main meeting topic. Obviously, we're meeting online now. Just a couple of points about the group. But one point really is that we have over 1,500 registered members, and we're growing all the time. But we can still use some more members. So tell your friends and coworkers about us. Also, I make the same offer every month to the people that actually are nice enough to show up to the meetings. Let us know what Azure topics you're interested in, and we'll arrange for them. We know a lot of folks, that can give presentations. I do it occasionally, but I try not to monopolize the group. So, just let us know if there's a particular topic you're interested in. This is the, this is the board of directors. I'm the group founder and president. I joined a new company last week. I work for Red Apt, a consulting firm, as a cloud solution architect. So I'm coming up to speed on that job these days. Roger Dahlman, who works for Deloitte as an enterprise architect, he's the co-founder and vice president of the group. He and I started this group back in 2013 with 4 people, and now we're up to 1,500. Tim Warner, whom a lot of you know, is one of our local Azure experts here in Nashville. He's an Azure MVP. If you take any of the Pluralsight courses, he's got a very large number of those courses that he's developed. And he's a member of the board. Bukela Alred is our director of academic outreach. She talks to and promotes us to all the colleges and universities in the area, and Nashville has quite a few of those. So she's a board member. Matthew Puckett was one of the Microsoft folks who helped us start the group back in 2013. He's now I think he's a global black belt here at the national level now. He lives in Nashville, but he's really operating at the global level. I guess his official title is Principal National Cloud Solution Architect. Oops. And a shout out, Jack Hagler is from Vaco, is on our board. And the reason Jack's on our board is he's been our refreshment sponsor since 2013. So if you've ever run a user group, you know that half your time is spent trying to find sponsors to provide pizza for the group. Well, Vaco's been providing food for us now for the life of the group. And he's an associate director of recruiting at Vaco. Again, a shout out to our sponsors. Microsoft provides us with a meeting space for free. Vaco provides refreshments. Tim Warner is actually providing his Teams subscription that we're using right now. When I left my previous job, I lost access to the Teams subscription that we were using. So now we're using one that Tim owns. That's his website link down at the bottom if you want to follow Tim and see what he's up to. And my company now is a sponsor too, by virtue of them letting me take time to run the group and anything else that might occur. Naturally, as we have events, I will probably hit them up for more sponsorship things. We are starting a sponsorship program. Now, it was a little easier to get that started when we had monthly meetings in person, but Roger Dahlman is actually in charge of our sponsorship program. So if your company is interested in providing things like, I don't know, stuff to raffle off or Amazon gift cards or anything like that, let Roger know, and we'll give you 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to talk about your company in exchange for goodies that we can raffle off. So let's talk a little bit about upcoming meetings. As we announced, this is part of a series of meetings that are going to discuss all various aspects of Azure DevOps. And we're starting off, as you'll hear in a minute, with an overview presentation, and then we'll be drilling down into specific subject areas. But these are all the areas we're going to be covering, with a focus on how people are using DevOps. You know, we also want this to be interactive. Ask questions, give us feedback, tell us what you're doing, and any issues you found, any gotchas, and so forth. You know, half the advantage of the group is networking and sharing information. Next month's meeting is on focusing on DevOps security. We're going to have Jeffrey Lockwood from HealthStream. He's an AVP of technology at cybersecurity. And then now, tonight's topic, Azure DevOps Series kickoff, Chris Ayers. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. And by the way, Chris, I apologize. I mentioned in the meeting announcement, I didn't use your last name. I just said Chris, like everybody knew who Chris was. So I apologize.
I'm working on it. I'm not there yet. One day.
Well, it's like Madonna, right? It's a single name.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Can you guys see my screen okay? Let me get rid of you. There we go.
Yep.
All right. I'm just going to go ahead and mute everybody just for the moment. I do want this to be interactive. So if you guys have questions, if I touch on a topic and you have some questions about it, you want to dig in a little bit more, or you want to have a discussion, the chat's open and we can have an interactive conversation. But tonight I want to talk about DevOps, what it is, not just the technology and the product from Microsoft, but the concepts and the thought process behind DevOps. And then I want to dig into their pipelines a little bit, talking about some of the CI/CD pipelines and some of the things we can do with it. But first, my name is Chris Ayers. I'm a DevOps lead at New Signature. New Signature is a Microsoft partner. We have, I don't know how many gold competencies, and we're a DevOps partner there. You have all my contact information on the screen. I do occasionally blog, and I try to talk about some of these things. And I'm going to share some resources at the end, and I'll try to provide the slide deck. But feel free to reach out and connect. I'd love to have conversations out there on Twitter. For tonight, like I said, we're going to talk about DevOps. We're going to talk about some concepts behind pipelines. And then we're just going to do demos. Like, I do not want death by PowerPoint. I really want to use the product. We're going to do YAML. We're going to do Classic. Might even build some stuff from GitHub. We're going to go all over the place. So maybe if we could define DevOps, that'd be great. People throw DevOps around a lot. Some people say it's just a job title. You know, we had an operations team. We renamed them to DevOps. Yay, our company does DevOps. Or we get a guy that does PowerShell and he automates some stuff, so we're doing DevOps. Or we used to release every 6 months, but now we're releasing every month. So we have smaller and faster releases. We're doing DevOps. Or maybe, the joke doesn't work anymore, but before, at lunch, maybe the dev guys and the ops guys kind of sat at the same lunch table and chatted, or walked by each other and said hi, and they collaborate. DevOps is a lot more than all of that. It is not just some of these activities. It is definitely a mindset, and the definition I love, and the one that I use the most, is this one. DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to our end users. This comes from Donovan Brown, but and all of the words here have been selected very specifically. Notice the first thing in the conversation is people, and then process, and then products. People using processes enabled by products to deliver continuous value to our end users. So We have to deliver it to our end users. Delivering value to dev or staging isn't really valuable to our end users. And our end users really don't care how many story points we finish or how many epics are done. They want that thing running in their browser, on their device. That's where the value is. But like I said, a lot of times in DevOps, when I'm a DevOps consultant, I go into organizations and I help them do all sorts of things, and I try to enable them. I don't like to go in and build pipelines. I go in and like to teach them how to think about DevOps and feedback. But usually it starts with people, and people is where the conversation should start, and then process. Usually the last thing we actually dive into is the tooling. I actually warn people if somebody comes in to talk about DevOps and the first thing they say is, you just need to install X and all your problems are solved, they're probably a snake oil salesman. You really should understand how people are working and how people are thinking before you dive into the tools, and the tools should enable your processes. And I hear a lot, we're already doing DevOps, but we don't do the stand-ups or the Agile or microservices or Kubernetes or hipster stuff. Like I said, DevOps is about people. So making sure everyone understands the vision and focusing on improvement, collaborating, looking at the process, trying to streamline things, increase efficiency, and then let the tools help with that. It can help with collaboration. It can help with productivity. And we're going to touch on a lot of these things in the demo. And this is a lot of the, this drawing is one I like to show people and talk about it because it's a continual thing, where you get that idea and you want to start coding it and then building it and testing it and releasing it, deploying it and monitoring it and feeding that back in to the plan. A lot of times you'll hear people talking about shifting left on testing, on security. And that means, from day one, we're thinking about how are we going to be able to test this application. We should start releasing it to production immediately, maybe not making it available, but we should know how to release it all the way through and operate it and monitor it. That should not be something that we spend a year building something and then at the very end we go, oh yeah, now we have to deploy it. DevOps touches things across the board. Yes, CI/CD, testing, release, but also, how are we gathering telemetry? How do we test in production? Do we know if the feature we're working on is being used by those end users? Is that really what the user wants, or just what we, as devs and product owners thought would be really powerful? Feature flags. I love talking about feature flags. I think it really helps the conversation with separating deployments from releases, which I'll touch on. Infrastructure as code. That is something I'm going to be showing in the demos. Super powerful. Having our pipelines, having our infrastructure, having our code all live together, so we know not only what our software is, but how to build it and how to describe what it runs on, all living in one repo that's versioned that people can review. Like I said, when I talk about feature flags, we can go and put code out in production with flags off. So if we have a window that's the only time we can deploy, and maybe we need to coordinate between 2 or 3 services, we can have a feature flag, control that integration, and have it off until all the pieces are there, and then we can turn it on and enable that new feature. So we can separate the idea of deploying code to an environment and releasing a feature to end users. We can use that for canary testing. We can use that for A/B testing. We can deploy things to small groups of users and then roll it out to bigger groups. Like I said, development practices are evolving these days. We have continuous delivery, trying to monitor things. And like I said, using feature flags, we can try to actually test things in production. Does that, add to cart button gain more interaction on the right or the left? Let's use a feature flag. Let's actually show it to users, and let's get real data from production. on how that works. Those feature flags really help us limit that blast radius of change and minimize the impacts that we can have when we release. Now, another thing I'm going to touch on is, and I'm sure people have some confusion about this. There's probably arguments that I'm explaining it backwards. So continuous integration a lot of times is you check in code, we do a build, we run our tests, maybe we deploy it out to dev for people to look at. Continuous delivery has an automatic way to deploy out to production, but it does not automatically deploy to production. There's a button or a switch or toggle something. Continuous deployment, though, if you check it in and it passes all the automated tests and it meets your level of quality, it can get shipped right out to production. This is something that's being done at some of the bigger organizations. I don't recommend it for everybody, but I do recommend having continuous delivery, having those automated steps in place where I can click a button and manually deploy it out. So I'm talking about all this stuff. Where are some of these ideas coming from? They're not just opinions or articles on best practice. A lot of this information comes from Accelerate, the State of DevOps report. This is something that's been put out every year for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm looking very forward to the next iteration. This is done by DORA, the DevOps Research and Assessment Organization. They have sponsors with Google, Pivotal, Redgate, people across the board. And they interview thousands of organizations of various sizes, running Linux, Windows, on-prem, in the cloud, Google, Azure, everything. So they've identified during their assessments 4 key metrics: lead time, deployment frequency, change fail rate, and time to restore. They also bake in that 5th one, availability, for like business continuity and like cloud adoption. But these 4 are really important because DevOps practices and the tooling in Azure DevOps and other boards and CI/CD platforms really help accelerate these 4 key metrics. And the reason we want to drive these metrics up are like deployment frequency. This is how often do you deploy to production? Typically, it's measured in deployments per developer per day. So for the elite, very high performing people, they might deploy multiple times to production a day. Many organizations are like medium and high, so they might deploy once per sprint. And when they say that maybe only deploy once a sprint, I ask them, so if you've deployed your code to your dev and QA environment, you've run all your automated tests, and you've had acceptance tests, and everybody's happy with the quality, why not release it to production? You don't have to wait to the end of the sprint to release, always. Lead time is another very important idea. From check-in, how long does it take to run through all my pipelines, run through my tests, run through my pull requests, my build, my release? How long does that take? Is it less than a day, or does it take months? When we talk about monitoring and observability, when something goes down, how long does it take you to get it back up? Now, one, you have to know it goes down, so you need some sort of observability. But if you had an outage, like on-prem, if your server crashed, could you get another one? Or if you're running in the cloud, can you quickly switch to another region through infrastructure as code or configuration? And then finally, the change failure rate. So when you deploy code, how often does it fail? So that might be from a number of different reasons, but these 4 are what drive a lot of software delivery performance. I've seen too many organizations that are still doing some manual deploys of building on a machine, copying to a file share, right-click deploying. We're not going to do that today. And the reason having those CI/CD platforms in place that can help deploy things more quickly and more frequently is the elite performers compared to the low performers are deploying 200 times more often. The idea is get out to production 100 times faster, and they can recover from incidents over 2,600 times more quickly, and they have 7 times lower failures. And looking at the technical practices that drive some of those software delivery performance numbers, if you look in the middle, there's continuous delivery right there. So what feeds into continuous delivery? Well, we need to have automation on deployment and integration. I recommend trunk-based development. I do not advocate for Git flow. I love trunk-based. Having a good architecture that's separated with interfaces, version control, having testing that devs can run that can be run in the pipeline, having good monitoring, database DevOps, and baking security in from the beginning. All of those lead into increased software delivery performance. This is another view of some of the things that help an organization. And if you look at the bottom, there's continuous integration with automated testing. Relying on manual tests all the time is not an effective way to have strong software delivery performance. And before I touched on availability, through these interviews, over 50% of the respondents had either public cloud or 27% had a hybrid cloud. So having a cloud solution these days is very important. My boss, and he always says, you can't have a DevOps strategy without a cloud solution, and you can't have a cloud strategy without DevOps. Like, they go hand in hand. Now, I've talked about a lot of things. We're about to hop into the demos, but as we go through DevOps and we start looking at learning these technical concepts and we start diving into them, I want you to keep this in mind. And this kind of applies to anything we learn as humans. When you first start learning something, there's quick wins and there's easy things, and you start diving into them and making progress. And then you get to a point where you look around and you start trying to automate things, and you kind of push the problem around a little bit, and then you start slowing down or experiencing some pain and technical debt. And so things get hard and you start going down the J curve. And as you start chipping away at it, you start pulling yourself out of the trenches and start making your way back out. So all I can say is everybody has this J curve at some point, and just stick with things. So let's before I get into the demo, actually, no, I'll do it right now. Let's go into the demo. So this is my personal Azure DevOps. Pretty much anybody can go out and create a new organization. It's very easy. You go out to dev.azure.com, you accept, and you can make a DevOps organization. This is a URL, and I have in here a project. Now, this project I actually imported from the Azure DevOps demo generator. So if you've never used this, you can go out to Azure DevOps demo generator. Yep, here we go. There's the link. And if you sign in, what's really nice about this is you give it a name, you pick your organization, and they have templates. And what this template will do is it will bring in not only some source code, potentially some build pipelines, it'll also bring in work items. And so you can play around with, like, what does .NET on an app service look like? What does Java on a web app look like? What does .NET Core on an app service using Scrum? And then they have under here, seeing some stuff with like Terraform or Key Vault or Docker. So they have some examples that you can look at and learn from. All of this is very scriptable. It's all scripted. And so what's kind of crazy about it is they built all of this through scripts and automation. Azure DevOps has both REST endpoints where you can use PowerShell or HTML to post queries, and it has a CLI. So there's an Azure CLI, the AZ command. There's an extension for DevOps, the Azure DevOps CLI extension. So it created all these work items. I'm not going to dive too much into boards. Other people are probably going to cover that. They have dashboards available where you can see the status of your work items, your stories, your builds. There's analytics and dashboards. There's, like I said, you can have teams to organize things and drag your tasks around and dive into your boards and look at your sprints. A lot of visibility so you can easily see where things are and what's happening to them. Now, under repositories, you can actually store code in two ways, Git or TFEC. I don't recommend TFEC. I recommend Git, and that's the default here. And so this imported this project. Okay, so here's some source code. Yeah, we got some tests. We have some source. Let's go look at pipelines. And before I really dive into pipelines, any questions so far or any topics you want me to dig into a little bit more on the DevOps side before we dive into the pipelines? Okay. I'll touch on these. So why not TFEC? So TFEC is what they call a centralized version control. You might be familiar with something like Subversion. If you look around at the ecosystem, if you look around at what's been happening in the last few years, sure, there are some tools that still support TFEC, but primarily all tools coming out, the integrations are all defaulting to Git or dropping TFEC and only saying with Git. Kids coming out of school are learning Git. TFEC isn't really taught anymore. They might use Subversion. When you start getting into larger repositories, centralized version control not only requires access to that server constantly, because you have to check it out from the server and check it back into the server and have contact with the server. With Git, I can clone it down, work distributed. I can easily share and collaborate with people quickly and then push it back up. I think there's more power and more flexibility with Git. Another major difference is when you do TFEC, branches are file-based. So when you do revisions, you're only versioning certain files or certain parts of the repository. When you get into Git, each revision essentially is the entire copy of the repository. So it is a full snapshot of what's happening at that point in time. Yes, we'll touch on the integration tests when we get into the pipeline, VJ. So I actually made two pipelines here, and I just want to show you a little bit about the DevOps pipelines. So if I say new pipeline, this is asking where your code is. Pipelines is very agnostic. Your code can pretty much be anywhere. There are a couple of restrictions. So Git repo, repos Git, so it's already in my source code. Any other Git repository anywhere. GitHub and GitHub Enterprise Server. For a lot of people, I'm sure you know, Microsoft acquired GitHub last year, and then recently they acquired NPM, the package manager for a lot of front-end dev stuff. So they have this amazing ecosystem, and there's a lot of really cool stuff going on at GitHub with GitHub Actions. But let's say you have some stuff in Bitbucket or GitHub or Subversion. I can just click this, and it will ask me to connect to my repo, and then I can pick a repo and do a build, and it will help detect the software I have and try to put a generated pipeline for me. Now, if you notice, as I do this, it's got these pipelines and it's asking for YAML. So another thing that's happened recently is Microsoft had a very GUI-based, what they call classic editor now to build pipelines, and they've transitioned to YAML. So if you saw at the bottom here, I clicked use classic editor without YAML. So this is what most people are used to seeing. There's still TFEC, GitHub, Subversion, and there's still, pick my project, pick my repo, pick a branch. If I continue, it still is trying to take me to YAML the new stuff. But if I said that this was like an ASP.NET application, here we are. So these are some steps used to build it. Now this is where I'm going to switch back to my slides for a minute, because there's a couple of concepts here. We've got triggers, we've got tasks, we've got pipelines, we've got agents. So how does all that fit together? So this is what applies to both the GUI builds and the YAML builds under the hood. And this is how you need to think about it. So triggers are the thing that tells the pipeline when to run. Okay. A lot of times the trigger for CI, so the continuous integration, the building side, a lot of times that trigger will be a check-in. It's a check-in to master or a pull request. For some reason, someone has checked in code or changed the repository, and so we want to trigger a build. Now, a build or a release or whatever is just a pipeline, and a pipeline has many stages. You can have one stage, you can have multiple stages. It's okay. Now, stages are filled with agents or are filled with jobs. Now, most jobs run on an agent. That means they run on a machine, either hosted by Microsoft for, hosted in Azure DevOps, or you can install a build agent on your machines. You can have it on your laptop. You can have it on an on-prem build server. Now, there might be reasons why you need to use an on-prem agent. That might be the fact that you have a licensed software. I have to use a special library. I have to have a hardware dongle. I have to have something, some Win32 app installed on the build agent so that I can do something. But then they also have some agentless jobs, and you can have a job depend on another job. Now, inside of the jobs are made up of steps, and those steps are either scripts or tasks. So if I do a script and I'm running on a Linux agent, that script might be Bash, or it could be PowerShell, because they do have, PowerShell core, the cross-platform PowerShell available. If I'm on Windows, my script might be command, or it could be PowerShell. And this is where I can do a large number of tasks from, the npm, NuGet, building, zipping things, unzipping things, and I'm going to dive into all that. So I just wanted to touch on that when I got to this point. Any questions about some of these terms? I'm going to go explore with them. I'm going to show you them. PowerPoint's over, demo time, but any questions on this? All right, back to demo time. All right, so for this pipeline, you can see I'm running in Azure. I am running in an Azure hosted pipeline. So this is a machine maintained by Microsoft. And if I look at this pool information, see, I'm not using any custom pool. So it's just the Windows hosted one. And I can pick. So I could actually build like an Xcode Mac OS app if I wanted. I can, if I'm doing .NET Core, I can build on Ubuntu, or I can build on the latest Windows with 2019 Visual Studio 2019. So that's where this pipeline is going to run. It's going to run on a Azure hosted, DevOps hosted VM. You can tell it's getting sources. So it's going to check out my repo. It's going to check out master. And right now it's told not to clean. So this is very powerful if I'm on a build server on-prem. Maybe I have massive jobs. These are all pre-existing. You don't have to install anything for the Microsoft hosted ones. You get 1,800 minutes free per month, and I'll touch on that too. But yeah, so if I'm on-prem, which you would have to install yourself, and I can actually show you that real quick, you could tell it to not clean. And so if you had a big build that took hours and you just wanted to build the differences, you could say clean false. If you wanted to make sure that you cleaned it every time, you could say true. And you could tell, do I just want to clean the sources or the output or some combination thereof? You can do tagging, you can do submodules and LFS. I will circle back to the agents. I'm going to just keep going for a minute. So like I said, I have a job, and this is just running on the machine, or on the pool that I have, and here's my steps. Now this is the older classic build. I'm going to show you the newer YAML one shortly, but this is using NuGet, and then it's doing a restore. So this is just making sure it's installed. This is doing the NuGet restore on the star.sln. If I had a custom feed or a custom NuGet, I could leverage that right here. Then I do a build, and I can pass all my build arguments, including where I want it to output the package. Right now it's going to this thing, which is a variable. Variables are all over pipelines, and they're super powerful, and I will show you them. So we're going to get to it, but this is going to put the output of the build into the build's artifact staging directory. This is just a variable and a variable, and I can look at those right here. So my build platform is any CPU, and I'm doing release. So if I go back here, it will pass build platform and release. And then there's some advanced stuff that we don't really need to worry about, but if you needed to change things out, you could. This runs tests. This is going to run all of our tests and put the outputs into a temp test results and then publish some stuff up. And that's the build. So if I back out here, I think I made a change. So let's say I backed out. I'll just go here. So my build pipelines. Let's go ahead and trigger a build and see what happens. So here's our build. Let's go ahead and run it. And you can see I can still change some variables if I wanted. I could change a branch if I wanted. I could override, I wanted the debug config. I could change that if I wanted. I might just go ahead and run it. You can see there's some information and here's some jobs. And I can click on it and I'm getting information about the job while it's happening. So I'm getting the logs streamed to me. So it's downloading. Yeah, so this is the name of the machine. If I go back here to initialize job, this is the name of that Windows machine that it's fully Azure maintained, Azure hosted. It got all the tasks I needed and it's setting some variables. And now if you look at checkout, you can see it checking out the source code and the other branches that are there. That's doing the NuGet restore. So all the things you might do in Visual Studio, we're redoing here. So that's great. So I can do a build, I can do tests. So now, and I can enable CI integration. Something I did not check, which I will just show you real quick. Here's that triggers we talked about. So every time I check in to Parts Unlimited, continuous integration is enabled. So when I check into master, it will automatically trigger a build. I can check this box, and if I have like 5 check-ins and there's like a build in progress, it won't do 5 more builds. It'll only do the next build. It'll batch them. I can also do things like branch and path filters. If I did not want things to build every time I touched like the README, I could say don't trigger a new build when someone has touched the README, or only include like a feature /star. I should be able to do that. But this is where you can control the triggers. You can also say, I want it to build every night at a certain time, or when this build finishes, I need you to go build something else. That can actually be interesting if you have, like, for instance, a Python integration test suite. You could have your main build, then trigger a secondary build. There's lots of things you can do with it. You can have little badges on your builds. You can, and we'll touch on this. There's some retention stuff that we can do. So, I've left the build I had going, and I've been like poking around. That build I just triggered 3 minutes ago has finished. There's a couple of warnings. I can go down here and I can look at, the tests and the build. I can see the logs from the build. It copied some stuff over to a place, did some publish artifacts. What is that? Well, here's our artifact. This is what we published. This is the output of our application. So we got some JSON files. We got our zipped up web file. This is all we need to do a web deploy. If you also notice, there's a little test tab here. This is showing us, if I come here and show that, it ran all of our unit tests, and we can see timings on our unit tests. And I can click on a unit test and see, if there was a work item associated with the test, if I had attachments or history of the test, maybe how long this pipeline ran. So if there was a stack trace on an error with that task, I can see it right here. I can look at my releases. Is there a release associated with this build? Oh, yes, there is. There's a release to dev and it failed. What about code coverage? See, I don't have code coverage enabled on this because this was just one of those pre-canned ones that I cloned. But pipelines are much more powerful than just building code. We can add stuff to them. So like in this one, still the classic editor, but I added some tasks. Here's SonoCube. SonoCube is a static code analysis platform. There's an open source version, and then there's paid versions, and then they also have Sonar Cloud. But see, I have hundreds, thousands of tasks that I could pull into this pipeline. You know, I could go into Amazon. I could do ARM templates. I can do, here's more AWS. There's Azure, and I can push stuff up. There's some built-in security scanners. Command line. I want to do container stuff with Docker. Build my container and push it up to a registry. Create a GitHub release. So as you go through, there's a ton of integrations. You know, there are builds that integrate with Jenkins or Maven, like they make a Java build and they push their packages to Maven, generate NuGet packages, or just run random PowerShell. Now, if you can't find what you're looking for in these tasks, well, there's a marketplace, and this is where you can write your own extensions or release things that maybe add a little functionality that you don't have. And I'm going to show that very, very, very shortly. But just going back to this, I've enabled an extension for SonoCube. Now, if you look here, there's this endpoint thing. As I talk to other services, and I'm going to have to talk to other services at some point, inside my project, there's a thing called service connections. I can create a service connection so I can interact with external services. Chef, ARM, AWS, GitHub, Jenkins, Kubernetes, Jira. And so I can use these integrations to do things. So I added SonarCube. I enabled some SonarCube extensions so that we can go into SonarCube and run a build. Now, I'm done with the classic pipelines after this. I really want to get into the YAML because that's where the future is going. That's where Microsoft's going. The industry has kind of moved that way. There's a ton of tooling around YAML because it adds a ton of functionality that you don't get with classic. And I'm going to touch on what those things are and some of the differences between them. But and I'm also going to show the releases. This is just the build side. Any questions so far while we're waiting for this guy to build? Because there's some cool stuff I want to show you. There's so much. All right. Well, so SonarCube, and this is directly from their documentation, you have to do a prepare before you do a build. And what it does is it sets a couple of little flags and a couple of little things. This last build I had took 4 minutes and 37 seconds. And I think that's kind of important that we have tools that as a developer I can check in and I can get feedback in under 5 minutes. Information like, does my code compile? How many developers do you know who have checked in code that doesn't compile? Does it meet our coding standards? Does it have any security vulnerabilities? Do our unit tests pass? Do our acceptance tests pass? Does it run? These are all like kind of basic questions, but our pipelines give us the ability to bake the quality in that we want. I don't want to really see a pull request or a code review, and the person, all they're doing is nitpicking about spacing, or I don't like the parentheses there. I need new lines after my braces. I don't think that adds value to a conversation. I think that the computers are really good at pattern analysis. So we could configure the tooling to let us know if something doesn't match our code standard, like a style cop or an FX cop. We can let it know if the tests don't pass. We can let the computer and the pipelines tell us if code doesn't compile. And we can actually focus our conversations on, are we doing what we are meaning to do, and are we doing it in a way that has a good architecture that supported, the things that humans are good at. All right, here we go. We're closing in. All right, I'm bored. I'm going to go to the other one that's already built so I can show you this cool stuff. So that added this extensions. And this takes me to SonoCube. Now, this is a different server. SonoCube, if you look, it has a bug detection and looks for vulnerabilities and security hotspots. It measures technical debt and code smells. So let me click on code smells. This is kind of cool. It lists them all. So I can go, what's this? It detects that somebody put in commented code. And it has an effort on how long it takes to take it out. I love that. I really love that. Unnecessary using. And there's all sorts of things, and they fit into these quality profiles, and it works on tons of languages. They have this built-in one, SonarWay. And if you look here, they have a lot more things on than off. I could go in and I could make my own profile and enable some of these to, find code smells, find bugs. Here's some CVEs. So I could look for issues that are maybe security methods, that cause some security issues. And then I can define gates like, hey, if my code coverage doesn't go up, I can fail the build. Or if I have duplicated lines or it's not maintainable. So I can use some tools and integrate them with my pipeline to get code coverage and quality things that I want. Now this is pretty cool, but not everybody wants to use tools to do a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to switch to another project. Any questions about SonoCube before I move on? Okay. I keep checking the chat, so I am monitoring it if you have a question. So I have a bunch of repos here that I want to talk about, and we're going to talk about the deployment stuff. So let me start with this one. This was something I did for Azure Bootcamp. You can see about a year ago. Now this has just the sample app. This is .NET Core. I've got the normal .NET New Web App, but I also have an infrastructure folder. And what's nice about this is ARM. Okay, so this is the normal Azure Resource Manager ARM template, and I have a YAML build. So here's my classic build. Now I'll go ahead and just kick that pipeline off to let it go, and we'll actually take a look at the pipeline while it's building. So this one, yep, you can see I'm getting my sources. I do an npm install, and I do it inside the web app client app folder, and I've got my .NET restore, build, test, publish. But then I have these two. So I actually make two artifacts. One for the code out of the artifact staging directory, and one for infrastructure. And so if I go back to my builds, and I am showing you the classic ways because I really want to show you the YAML ways. I just want to make sure we have a common understanding. So looking at these classic builds, you can see here's my two artifacts. There's my infrastructure, and there's my web app. Now I make artifacts of my infrastructure because I have found and I separate my builds and my releases because I have seen people build and release to Azure from their build pipeline. What that does is all you can ever do is release the current state of your repository. It is very hard to go back to a numbered or a built release because you don't actually save your release. You are just doing that one snapshot in time. So I like to separate. Here's my build. I'm doing build stuff. And then here's my release. Now this is changing as we go into YAML pipelines and multi-stage pipelines, and we'll talk about that. Here's my release, and you can see I have a couple of stages. I have a dev stage, I have a QA stage, got some green boxes, I got a little blue box here. What these stages are is, if I edit this release, this is saying, hey, go grab that classic pipeline, and anytime it's built, see I've got the little trigger, I want to do a release. So if I check in code into this repository, it's going to kick off a build. When that build finishes, it's going to have an artifact. It's going to trigger the release. And now the release is going to come in here and go to dev, and it's going to do some stuff. Now, I've got a couple variables. I got a resource group location and a name, and I've got my tasks for dev. So here's my ARM template deployment, and I'm deploying to a MSDN subscription, but I've got some variables for my resource group, and I've got some variables for my location, and I'm pointing to an artifact. There's that infrastructure like coming right out of that build. So if I go up and look in Azure, hey, look, I got some resource groups. I got a dev, and it's got something in there. It's got a QA. It's got something in there. Let's go ahead and delete this one. So this is an example doing this ARM template resource group deployment. This is an example of infrastructure as code. I have my infrastructure to run my web app living next to my source code. And one of the things I did is I'm using this ARM outputs. This is actually a third-party extension that I added from the marketplace, which is super awesome because you just point it at the same subscription and same resource group as you did an ARM deployment, and it just copies out all the outputs for you and makes them variables. Because I don't have a variable named web app name. Don't have one here, but in my pipeline, I'm deploying to a web app name, which is a variable. So my ARM template creates a resource group, creates a web app, outputs the name of the generated web app name, and then ARM outputs turns it into a variable, and my Azure App Service deploys it to that variable name. And if I needed to do some transformations, I could come in here and I could transform my app config. So let's go look at that release. So before we were looking at release 4 and I kicked off a build. Well, it has auto deployed the release 5 to dev. Now this is a problem I see so many people having, and I just want to, I left it this way for a reason. You can have deployment approvals for future gates. So like this QA is pending approval for me. It's been waiting in approval. I can defer it for later. I can approve it. I can reject it. But if I approve this, if you watch what happens, it got the approvals. So now it's waiting for an agent, and now it's connecting to the agent, and it's starting to do the job. I did delete that. I forgot. I deleted Azure Global Bootcamp QA. Well, I'm not too worried about it. Whoops, sorry. Because I have it set up so that it will automatically recreate the resource groups when it deploys. I have it on creator update incremental. And these are some techniques you can use. We actually do this with a lot of clients, specifically like testing environments. We can, use ARM templates, use infrastructure as code. We've got their build. We can create a test environment, deploy their app to their test environment, and then run a bunch of scripts and, pester tests, web requests, all sorts of automation against that test environment. Record the outputs and then destroy the environment so that they're not sitting there spinning resources constantly. So if I go back out here to resource groups, and refresh, should show up momentarily. There we go. There's our QA. So one deployment succeeded. If I come back here, that was the ARM template deployment. Now it's got a service connection to this web app service, and so it should start deploying to that momentarily. Yep, there you go. Package zip deployment. Deployed to web app. Cool. So if I go out here and I go to my app service, might take it a sec to spin up, but should have deployed the app to the web service. Yep, there we go. There's our basic little web app. Now that I hinted at it a minute ago, but this situation, I see this a lot. And so let me trigger another build and show you what I'm talking about. So when I trigger these builds, what happens with the releases are this QA one is going to keep waiting for me because it's going to release them in order. But I know, maybe I found a bug in QA when I released that one, and then somebody was working on it in dev and tried to fix it. They found a problem. They made another dev build. I don't want to approve these or have to come in here and reject them. That's annoying. And not only is it annoying, I'm going to get a whole bunch of emails. So there's a nice little setting here. If you look at deployment queue, I can just hit that button. Instead of deploying all of them in order, I can deploy just the latest and not have to worry about all the things in between. And because I'm using ARM templates and I've got some variables, I can also go clone and say maybe I want to call this stage. I can go to my variables, give this a name of stage, save that. Oh, I think I forgot to set my validation. Let's see. Oh, I still have validation. Cool. So let's see what happens. Back to our builds. So that one's still building. Should be done in about a minute. Are you guys seeing how these things connect? All right, so this is classic stuff. Now let's finally, once this is done, go take a look at YAML. I just wanted to show you how easy it was to set up some builds, set up some releases. Now, when someone goes and talks about repos, there's going to be some discussion about branch protections. Branch protections are the things that let you force people to do pull requests, trigger automatic reviews, trigger builds on check-in. I usually set them up. I actually have some scripts that set that up because I like having builds on every check-in. I like to know it builds, but I don't release that out to dev usually. I wait till the pull request is finished. I use trunk base, so I only have the builds on master that get released out. All right. There we go. Publish, 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 and done. So if I come over here and I look at my release for this, it should auto trigger. Oh, there we go. See, it auto triggered. It sees the new stage. It'll start deploying to dev momentarily. Yep. Now, the other thing that's nice, these green boxes and blue boxes, this is telling you what versions are deployed where. So I mentioned you can have a dashboard. I actually set up a dashboard for my builds, and I can see what version is in what environment very easily. They really want you to have good information about the state of your pipelines and your data. Yep, never deployed to stage. 2 builds ago is what's in QA right now. So you can have this dashboard to have that quick snapshot view of things or understanding build times. And I'm not worried about these. When I'm first setting up pipelines, I might get into double digits. It depends upon what I'm trying to do. So we've deployed to dev. QA is waiting on approval. That one I think is queued up because I had not had that cancel setting prior, but we'll see if it cancels it out once the QA deploy happens. Yep, it canceled it out. Perfect. All right, so that's what build and releases it look like. This has stages. The approvals are here for the stages. I can set gates to check Azure policies, make sure the resources are named right. I can invoke REST endpoints. I can have a function called. I can look at Azure Monitor. So one of the really cool things you can do with this is, let's say I deploy. After I deploy, as a post-deployment, maybe I have a gate, and I say go monitor Azure App Insights, Azure Monitor, and see if there are any errors that have popped up. And if there are errors, roll back or redeploy. So you can have this as a self-healing system that you've triggered a release and somehow the release has failed, bad connection string, bad build, something, and have it auto deploy, the last successful one. You can let the tool help you do the work. Now, approvals are completely different in YAML, and I'm gonna touch on that as we dive into YAML. So that was our repository. Let's look at the same repository, but with YAML. So here's something to notice. YAML pipelines live in the repository with their code. When I'm dealing with these pipelines, the classic pipelines, there's a little bit of limit to what I can do to them. I can edit them. I can queue them up. You can do some cloning, but it mainly lives in this classic editor. Now you can go in and you can do task groups. So you could try to make a set of tasks. So I can come in here to my classic build, and I can try to make a set of those tasks. Yeah, save as a template. So I could take those tasks, save them out to a file, and import it in as a task group, and then call that. It's kind of clunky. I really like the YAML way because, and I've done this with multiple clients, and if you have, I've had a client where they're coding, they're actively working in a repository, and we need to set up new pipelines or new things and not disrupt them. So what I can do is this right here. I can make a branch, and I can be working in a YAML pipeline in a branch. So I've made this YAML pipeline. You can see there's some warnings. I can edit this, and it brings up this code editor. You can see I'm in the Azure Pipelines branch. Now this is a different structure. This is different. They do have, you can see right here, they have some guidance on how to do these pipelines. I love the Microsoft documentation. The documentation is phenomenal. It is so good. So yeah, talking about the triggers. So they have some CI triggers depending upon the repo it comes from, and the PR triggers, and then here's that classic stuff. So, we're doing a trigger. They do have the YAML documentation and the classic documentation. So that's what we were looking at a minute ago. Here's the YAML. So let's go through this YAML file and we'll talk about it. Actually, I'm going to start with a different one because I have a different one. So I'm going to start with this one. I have my pipeline in this file here, and I'll walk through it. And I want to let me make this bigger. I apologize if things were small for anybody. There we go. So let's start here. Here's our trigger. So when I check into master, this is going to trigger this pipeline file. And you can have multiple pipeline files, multiple YAML files in your repository, and you can trigger them in different ways. But this one is triggered on check into master. And that could be, I'm trying to check into master directly. That could be, I'm trying to do a pull request into master from another branch. Pool. This is going to be the image, the type of machine, the type of agent that this runs on. So in that older example from Parts Unlimited, we were running on like a 2017 Windows machine. This is running on Ubuntu. So we're probably doing .NET Core or something like that. You can see I have some variables here, and it's using star syntax for solutions. There's another similar variable for build platform and configuration. And then I have a couple other variables that I'll touch on. Like, this is intimidating, I know, for a lot of people. Like, we've got these tasks and there's these inputs. Well, everything's not so bad. Let me hit edit so that I can do stuff. It's not as bad as it seems. Like, so you can do control space and you can get some auto completion. Let me see if, I think it's because I'm in full screen. I'm not seeing some of this stuff. I know why I'm not seeing some of this stuff. If I'm in the pipeline editor, it brings this tooling with it. So this makes life a little bit easier. So if you notice that same task we were looking at in just the text editor, now that I'm in the builds area, there's like a little settings link. And if I click that, I can still have a very similar GUI-like experience to help me understand some of the settings that I might need to fill out. The other thing that's really nice about this is, like I said, it has code completion, and these are settings that are applied right on the right, and these are filtered to this level of this task. So just walking through, we've got a task to do a .NET restore. We've got a task to do a build, and I'm passing in the solution variable, the $parenthesis syntax, and it's going to reference that variable, and I'm giving it the build configuration, so I'm doing a build. Now I'm doing a .NET test. So right after I build my code, I want to run my tests, and I'm passing a couple extra properties, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in a minute. I want to have my .NET code run my unit test and give me code coverage, and I want it to do it for free. I don't want to have to pay for extra package or tool to do it. And there are some really cool tools out there that do it. One of them is this extension report generator, and one is Cobertera that you add to your .NET as a package. So we're running our report, and we're going to publish our code coverage results. We're going to publish our test results, and then that's kind of cool. I don't need SonoCube. There's a build quality checks, and this one's actually built in. It's really neat. You can say maybe I want less warnings than before, or I want more code coverage than before, and it has to go up to at least 80%. I can tweak some of these things. I will say that the open source tools I'm using can do line and branch. It cannot do block, even though block is more accurate. So notice none of the changes actually took effect. You have to kind of hit add, and what it does is it then copies from the editor on the left into where you are on the right. And this has bitten me a lot of times, just saying, if I am copying a value and I wanted to do something and I paste the value in here and I don't think about it and I say add, it will just put it where my cursor is. So be aware of that, but Control Z does work, so you can't undo it. So world's not over, but and then we're doing a publish. Again, little settings link. I can see it in a nice editor, and I'm publishing my output. So this is that .NET Core build. Let's look at what this runs like. This is YAML. So far, it looks about the same. Hey, it's doing a job, got the logging. Very similar experience to before. Another thing to note, a lot of times they will have links. Like this one has report generator. This one has a link. It's out on GitHub. This is extra parentheses. Out on GitHub. So it's an open source extension. And they have links to, like, if you're using it in different ways. So if I'm using external tasks, there's usually links for them. Now notice .NET Core, small app, this built in 30 seconds. And get tests. Kind of cool. Seen that before. Yay. We've got code coverage, which I actually don't have a test on this one, but that actually links to code coverage, but I'm going to show you one that does, and it's awesome. So that's YAML. Now, what's nice about the YAML, like I said, I can be here. I can come down here and make changes if I need to. I could add the, find a script task. Maybe I want to do bash, inline, echo hello world. Add it. When I hit save, I can create a new branch for this, and I can initiate like a pull request. And so I can go through the normal review process. It's not just some pipeline that I've edited in the GUI. I now can go out to the repo. I can go to my sample, and I can look at the change that was just now, and I can compare. I can review. I can have feedback and discussion on why did you change that. And then if you go into, I kind of hinted at it before, if you go into your branch policies on Git, this is where you can say, I need to have 2 people review my code. I need linked work items. I need comments resolved. I need a build policy, and I need it to build successfully every time. Maybe I want an automatic reviewer anytime somebody tries to change, see, affecting folders. So maybe I want to, anytime someone touches the pipelines folder, I need to get added to the review, or someone in the DevOps organization or a manager, because maybe you're trying to change the build in a way that's not good. So we can do those tests. Going back to that build, I believe I did this one, added a unit test. There we go. There we go. Here's our code coverage. So you can see test 1 assembly, 4 classes, 4 lines, 2 uncovered lines. And it actually shows you the line coverage and branch coverage by class. And if I dig into the class, it shows me the methods it found and the code coverage, and it shows me the code highlighted. This is through those free tools that I put in place, and you can see, how things are covered and not covered. This stuff's awesome. I think this is really cool. All right, so I've been building a lot of .NET. What if we were to build, I don't know, some Node, React? We could do that. We can even have code coverage on our React. Maybe we're using TypeScript. So I've got code coverage essentially on a React script, and I can see the tests that were run. Well, let's take a look at that YAML file. See, this is using just unit tests. So if I go back to my summary, I can see the branch, the repo, and the revision. So if I go here, there's my YAML. Let me just actually go to the repo. So here's our repo. There's our React app. I did create React app if anyone's interested. You can see it's got all the React goodness and the standard React scripts. I had a little bit of configuration for the code reporting, but let's look at the pipeline. And again, trigger on master. We're using Ubuntu to build again. And here's my steps. I've got a task that takes an input of 10, and it just does a display, install node, make sure we have node installed. And we have a script here. It's a multi-line script because there's this little pipe here. And we're doing npm install and an npm build. And then we have another script called test. And for create React app, you have to pass a variable CI if it's equal to true if you're building in a generator. And then I do my publish and my publish. And so very similar, very transparent if you need to try to read it. And just like with the other stuff, you got to do, there's some grunt, there's a Java tool installer, so I could install a specific version of Java. If I need to do some Python or some Python tests, all of those are available to me. I do this on some of mine. I don't have a good demo of it right now, but if I need to do a Docker build and push an image up to an ACR or some sort of container registry, it's very easy to do on the build side. Let me show you a couple more things. So let me look at this build. Now, I had some failures. I canceled it. I had some, the demo gods weren't happy. Okay. But let me show you where it was going. So look, it's got all these steps here. This is a lot of steps, but it's very similar to the .NET Core steps we did before. Did a checkout, did a restore. This looks like a normal build, like I was doing before, getting my code steps. It was hanging on this build quality gate because I didn't have a good test. That's okay. This is where it gets kind of cool. Let's go look at that pipeline. Well, we got some different stuff this time. This is a little strange, and I just want to talk about some of the power that's going on here. So this has a resources section, and it's saying it depends on this shared repository. So it's a different repo. It's not even in this code base. It's depending on a different repository. Okay. So let's scroll down a little bit. There's my build. So like I talked about the task groups before, I have a standardized .NET pipeline that has code coverage, and it takes some parameters. Takes a parameter of name and a code coverage threshold. And it's looking for, in the jobs folder, a .NET pipeline coverage YAML in this shared repository. And this is something I've seen in some organizations where they have a standardized way of building Python, React, Node, .NET, and they try to name things or have them set up a certain way, and they want it, or they have some release steps. They have a task that they have to copy it to this folder and then do this thing, whatever it might be. Well, let's actually here. I'm gonna go. Got a new tab, files. I'm gonna go to the shared folder. Got two folders here, tasks and jobs. And there's my .NET, so jobs, .NET pipeline with code coverage, jobs, .NET pipeline with code coverage. So let's take a look at this. Here's my parameters. So the name, the VM image I'm using, which defaults to latest, Ubuntu, and code coverage threshold, which is 90%. And if you look here, I've got slightly different variable syntax, but I have a name for my job, which is code. I'm going to reference my parameter VM image. I'm going to build on that. And here's all those steps we saw before. A .NET restore. That's from an artifact feed. I forgot to take it out. The build, code coverage. So I have all these steps here in a centralized place. I can, if I have like 10 projects that are all referencing this pipeline, I could edit it once and affect those other builds. If we added integration tests, or we had a new reporting threshold, we could do something like that and have it in one spot. Another really powerful thing I've seen is, there's a wiki here in DevOps. I've seen the builds gather release notes from the work items and publish it to the wiki. One of the, I will keep going back to this documentation all the time. There's some amazing stuff. So they have predefined pipeline variables. These are like super powerful. I need to know the job name or the ID of the machine, or the work folder I'm in. I need to change my build number, or understand who queued it and add that into the reporting. These can all be used inside your pipelines, and it's definitely part of the building blocks I use all the time. Now, as awesome as this stuff is here, those approvals that we saw on the classic releases are completely different. So here, if I go up here, these are my work items and stuff. I really don't have a lot of notification. I get an email, and I might see some stuff that I need to go do a release. I kind of go here and I click approve. Well, when I talked earlier about the service connections, as you change to YAML, the service connections actually are where the approvals happen. Like, they've moved it. So see, there's a usage history. You can see the different builds and releases I've used using this connection to Azure. Where the approvals change when you go to YAML is they are now here at the service connection under approvals and checks. And this is where you can see how and what can go on it. So you can limit, like, nobody from the dev branch could use my prod subscription, or they can't deploy to the prod subscription at 2 in the morning or 12 noon. You can have some of those other queries and things that you had before, or you can make sure that the pipeline always comes from, that predefined build pipeline that we approved. I'm going to go ahead and add myself here. I just want to, instructions, allow them to approve their own timeout. So now I've set an approval on the service connection. So if I go back to my repo, my pipeline, I'm going to run this one. This is what they call a multi-stage YAML pipeline. So you can see there are 2 stages here. There's a build and a dev deploy. Everything's connected now. I can, when I'm in a stage, I can redeploy a stage. There's a lot of functionality I can do. But what should happen now, DevOps and the YAML engine that's running it through pipelines knows when I get to dev deploy. Let me up. I want to show it to you side by side. So this is the one that's running. Let me go to edit. So when I get down here, I have an Azure Resource Manager connection right here. It knows inside this job that I'm referencing Azure, and it knows that, that has an approval gate. Now this, like I said before, with that image on jobs and stages and pools and stuff, I have multiple stages. This is my build stage. So for my build stage, I have a job, build, and I'm running these tasks. These are all the steps to build. I'm also publishing a pipeline artifact, which is a little different. It's essentially publishing an artifact from this stage to this stage because I'm downloading it here. And then I'm going to try to deploy it. So that's why this looks different now, where I have a build and there's my build job. And I could actually have multiple jobs if I wanted to do builds and tests and things like that. I'm just going to wait for this. I think the dev deploy fails, but I want to see the approval. So how are we doing, guys? I have not seen any questions or conversation really. So I just want to make sure we are holding okay as we're waiting on this to build. Okay. Now, is there something I have not covered that you guys have some very specific questions about? Like I will, I'll show you one or two more things before we're done, like connecting to GitHub or automating DevOps. That's something I use a lot to help set up projects, but let's let this finish. So there's a publish. So now if I come back here, look, see it's waiting. So because I set that approval, yes, Jason, I have my understanding is this will be out on YouTube. So that approval was here under our project service connection because of how I did this, and it doesn't show it's run yet, doesn't show it's approved. So if I go here and click, one approval is needed, so I can review this. You can see the resource I'm trying to use, and I can approve it. So now that job should run. If I go back here to my connection usage, I should see, might take it a minute to show up, but I should see it there. My apologies about the speed, Jason. There is so much to cover, and I know that most people are used to the classic stuff. The YAML is a little scary for some people, and so I wanted to make sure that I conveyed the messaging through the classic pipelines first and tried to show some of the comparisons. So now if I go back and look, that should show me, yep, there's my usage. So DevOps is a very strong auditing engine. This is at the project level, I'm seeing the usage, but if I go up to my organization, this is where auditing is. So you can see lots of things like, oh, see, I did a service connection and I did a deployment and I added an approval check. This is, and you can actually give people audit only permissions so they can't go and poke around the code, but they can see the auditing reports. Now, I mentioned earlier, someone had asked about agent pools and how those work. If you just do DevOps, if you get some Azure pipelines, you're good to go on that. Now, if I wanted to add a pool, like a self-hosted pool, yeah, this is new. This is in preview. This is awesome. You can give it a VM scale set, and it will spawn it and expand it if you have a lot of builds, and then go back down. So it can auto provision it and auto spin it up and then shrink it back down. It's really cool. It's in preview. It's not out everywhere yet, but this is an agent pool. So I just made a pool. Yay. If I wanted to install this agent, this is what this would do is, there's steps for Windows, Linux, and Mac, and this is open source. What this agent does is you make a folder, and the command pretty much just unzips. It downloads and unzips this agent, and it phones home. You don't actually have to open your firewall to let DevOps and Azure connect to your server or your machine, this agent pulls. So it just needs 443, HTTPS SSL access out to Azure DevOps. And it will check in every once in a while going, hey, do I have a build job? And when it does, it'll download the things, download the tasks like we saw, run the build, and then publish the stuff back. And that's pretty much it. And you can, like I said, open source out here on GitHub. They have documentation on it and what it does, the capabilities, how to set it up, couple of ways to deploy it as an agent or not. But this is actually a, like I said, pretty secure way of doing things. You don't have to poke holes in stuff. And again, the docs are phenomenal, and they have learned. Now the Microsoft hosted agents. So they have a couple of choices. They have some labels. Here's the classic label. Here's the YAML label. How to pick between them. But yeah, there's all sorts of discussions on how much you can get, how much you can run it. For most small projects, you won't run into limits on the agents. What will happen though is if you build a lot, let me go back to my organization, and this is at the organization level. This is under like billing and usage. So for Microsoft hosted agents, they give you 1,800 minutes for free. If you do self-hosted, you can install as many agents as you want. If you want to run 100 agents and have 100 builds going at the same time, you could do that. With Microsoft, just out of the box, you're going to get like one parallel job. And you get an additional parallel job for each. Yeah, here we go, parallel jobs. Free tier. So you can see how many minutes you've used. Parallel jobs, you get one free parallel job and then one for enterprise. If you wanted to have a whole bunch, just set up agents. That's fine. See, unlimited. If you have public projects, a lot of this is at the organization level. Billing can be a whole separate thing, and project structure and usage. Probably talk for a week on all the different topics associated with DevOps. So So that was the agent thing. Now there is also an idea of a deployment pool. So when you're trying to deploy to some machines, and this is really only supported in Classic, as you start moving towards YAML pipelines, let me find that link. Yep, perfect. Nope, that's not the link. There's always so many links. Again, I live in docs.microsoft. They have a very detailed syntax, by the way, with schemas and examples of the YAML. And if you use Visual Studio Code, there is an extension that adds syntax highlighting and makes life super easy, or easier. There we go. So similar syntax highlighting, similar, I can get some code completion. There's an extension out there called what was it, pipelines? Azure Pipelines. So this is a good extension. It's on the marketplace. It associates with the YAML files, and yeah, this makes editing pretty nice. I like it a lot. So I recommend that for some of the highlighting. But yeah, the docs has great documentation, great examples, stuff on the transforms, that just Googling for the term that you think you need is probably the term that you're going to need. They've done a really good job documenting this stuff. So, and that's about all I've got at this point. Yeah, there's a ton of capabilities. There's a ton of, seeing what's there, seeing approvals, dashboards to understanding your builds. You can link in your code coverage and your test coverage. The demo generator is phenomenal. Yeah, there's so much to talk about and cover. I'm really trying to stay limited to the pipeline side, but yeah, it's very nice. So I think we can unmute everybody, or we can take questions if people have some questions. I'd love to dive into things a little bit more. I was just going to show this while I was waiting. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that DevOps is very scriptable. That there's a CLI for it. So if I go up to DevOps right now, you'll notice I don't have a repo for sample project, or maybe I will by the time I get there. Yeah, I don't have sample project. But this is creating a repository and setting up a project and setting up pipelines and pull requests and all that stuff. Didn't save it. Did someone have some questions? I hear some sniffing. Yep, just making sure everything builds. Pushing it up, adding the pipeline. Created a new pipeline. There's that sample project. There's that layout. There's a pipeline. It's already doing a run. So. This is out on GitHub. People can take a look at it and use it all they want. I'll make sure the links are provided. But just touching on a couple of points. I'm really, like I said, I talked about DevOps being a lot more about technology. That State of DevOps report, they, Nicole Forkskin, along with Jez Humble and Gene Kim, they wrote about more in depth the study, the results. They really go into detail on the State of DevOps stuff. So the book is phenomenal. It's like $15-20. And if you've never done some DevOps stuff, I cannot recommend enough the Phoenix project. Like, you'll feel like you probably worked there. And then they recently wrote the Unicorn project. These are easy reads. These are stories. Get the audiobook, get the book. It's such a good story, and it really helps teach you the ideas and the thoughts behind DevOps. Fast feedback. using automation, the production first mindset, shifting left on a lot of things like testing and operations. And then one of the books I've been reading lately, which I love, is Team Topologies, because as you start talking about how teams interact, do we have a DevOps person in every team? Do we have a separate team? How do the different groups talk to each other and work together? So this introduces some really cool ideas that it's very eye-opening. So yeah, just wanted to talk about those. So that's all I have.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chris. Excellent presentation. Any last minute questions for Chris? Okay, silence is consent. I guess that's okay.
This is the only downside, really, of these remote presentations. I can't see people's faces. I can't gauge if people were interested or thought I was terrible. Oh, I see one there. Jenkins versus DevOps. My thoughts. So my thoughts on that question is what I get with. Here, I'm going to actually pop out into a different project. I'm going to pop back into Parts Unlimited. What I like about DevOps is I can have the work items, the stories, the sprints here. We can have conversation about work. I can have visibility. I can get the work. I don't have to glue together a Jira, a Jenkins, an Octopus. I can have my work item. I can see that there is a branch and a pull request created right there from my work and link right over to it. I can, depending upon the build, let me go find a build. So like this build here. So looking at this build, no real related, but I can see the releases associated with the build. There's an end-to-end linkage where I can see, what. I think it's because that was probably the second build. Let me look at the first build. Or let me just trigger a build. Let's do it that way. I just have end-to-end traceability. It's very easy for me to see from one branch, from one commit, from one check-in, what's happening. And so I've just merged this code in. It should trigger a build. Yep, they're both triggering because they're both set up to trigger. So if I look at this one, this is building, and there's the related work item. So if I now go and I'm just looking at this work item, I can see there's the pull request, there's the development, and now you can see right here, it's going to go into builds and releases. So if at some point in the future I was wondering when was that released, you can see right from the story, oh, it was put in this build and this release. It's all linked together. Yes, Jenkins has a lot of open source connectivity, but so does DevOps. And when I'm using Azure DevOps Server, I don't really have to worry about maintaining my own server, installing it, configuring it, backing it up, doing the administrative stuff, doing all this stuff. So having one source of truth for everything that's all linked and traced together, I think is the reason I usually lean towards DevOps. Thank you, William, Joel, and Jason. And that was a good question, Vijay.
Okay, well, thanks again, Chris. Excellent job. And for the folks that are out there, remember next month we're doing the second episode of Azure DevOps, focusing on DevOps security. So we'll see you guys then.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, guys.
If you want to stick around for a minute or two, I can answer that question. You can stop.
We can continue recording.
Okay.
It's okay.
William, you had a question on costs. So, one, you can go create your own DevOps. It's free for anybody to go create a DevOps. You can see I have a couple. I have like 5. By default, you get 5 users for free, 5 basic users. What that 5 basic users gets you is also unlimited stakeholders. So stakeholders is a free level. They have limited things. They can go look at boards. They can review things. Basic is free for the first 5 users. It is paid for by month. And if someone has an MSDN, I'm trying to find the billing link because I don't want to set up billing. I just want to see the billing. What is nice? Here, I'll just go here. So if you have MSDN, you automatically get pricing. That's going to take me to the wrong place. I'm blanking right now. It's not the one I want. Pricing. Let's just go there. There we go. All right. So yeah, if you have MSDN, it comes with a license. So you don't need to buy basic licenses or anything like that for anyone with MSDN. There's also multiple levels of the MSDN. So if you have like enterprise, I'm pretty sure it comes with like test plans. But if not, you can see test plans like adding testing. And there's a huge testing engine inside of DevOps. That's one of the more expensive pieces, but you get a free pipeline. You can have free self-hosted pipelines. You get 2 gigs of artifacts. So if you're generating NuGet packages, Maven packages, NPM packages, and you need them stored internally and not put out on the cloud for everybody, you just want to, make building blocks of your own code so that you can version them and release them. See, look, there's little sliders here. So I'll put the link in the chat. Yeah, if you need more, more parallel jobs, you can scale it up. There are some extra self-hosted stuff, but for the most part, this is the one that most people care about. So it's $6 a user a month after the first 5. So, you got 20 people, $90 a month. Yeah, boards, Kanbans, the repos, unlimited repos for Git. And let's see here. Trying to find there we go, DevOps benefits. So here's the eligibility. So enterprise, you get boards, test plans, pipelines, and so here's the other piece, because I know a lot of people do MSDN, and so test professional gets test plans for sure. Enterprise, you get like a little bit of everything. Professional does not get test plans, so those values, adjust as you pick different stuff. And now actually things are changing. GitHub Enterprise is being bundled with MSDN in a lot of cases, and I didn't really touch on it, but GitHub Actions is amazing. I've really been digging into that, and you can have, I actually have a couple projects where you can have your code hosted out at GitHub and have the pipelines either build as actions on the GitHub side or over in Azure pipelines. So you can see, actually kind of have it building both. So similar stuff, and they use YAML as well. A lot of like Helm and Kubernetes and a lot of things are moving to YAML, so I would definitely keep an eye out for that stuff. So thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. I hope I answered all your questions, and I hope it was beneficial to you. Like I said, feel free to follow me on Twitter or reach out on LinkedIn. I will make sure the slides are posted so that they're available.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Excellent job again.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording, and we'll post it on the YouTube channel, which I mentioned in the chat. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So We'll see you guys the third Thursday of next month.
Yeah, I got some old stuff there. Don't look at the CGI bin and HTML and Perl, or there's a COBOL one and some Turbo Pascal from back in the day.
I got old books too. I don't actually. Let me